Welcome everybody, New Way Forward. This is Joe Erpelding from Design 39 Campus, and we're super excited to have you together today to really talk about that lens of designing with equity. And what better way to do that than with students? And so we want to just kick this off right now with our students here from Design 39 Campus who've been thinking about who's at the table and who's not. And so we always want to make sure that in a learner-centered environment that our students are at the center of our work. So Tanay, why don't you kick it off?
Sure, Ms. Shri. Hello, everyone. My name is Tanay, and I'm a 7th grader at Design 39 Campus. Educators and students have an impossible challenge ahead of us this year. Oh, there you go. Sorry, technical difficulties. And we need to work creatively and with empathy to get virtual learning as right as possible. At D39, we always love to start with thought-provoking questions to help guide us through the design process. Oh, just as a side note, I'm going through something called puberty, so if you hear my voice all deep and raspy, please ignore it. All right, back to the thought-provoking questions. Would you teach differently if you knew that a future president was in your class? And how might you prepare a future president for solving almost impossible problems in a virtual environment? How can students have a voice in making virtual learning as awesome as our in-person learning? So basically, given today's scenario, we want to make lemonade out of bad, and may I say, crappy lemons. Isn't it odd that typically students don't have a voice in what their learning experiences should look like, even though they're the main recipients of learning? I mean, could you imagine if Apple didn't listen to what the users wanted in the iPhone? We wouldn't have larger screens or even the App Store. That's where students at D39 are empowered, as we have the space to create experiences that matter to us, and that's what ignites our student agency. So where do we start? Do we start with learning first or the schedules? Across the nation, we see students being plugged into the same scheduling, from bell to bell and class to class. We decided that we'd design our virtual learning by starting with learning first instead of putting the schedule first. What this means is we want to design the virtual learning program based on how we learn best and then working on scheduling classes optimally. Diving deeper, this would also take into consideration what works for one may not work for another, as at the end of the day, it's not only about what was taught, but what was learned. At D39, we believe that failure is a natural part of the path to succeeding. So with this in mind, we started by brainstorming, ideating all the possible failures that could happen as we think about virtual learning. Here we see our Padlet ideating all the possible failures. Our goal is to design our learning to avoid or mitigate these failures. We believe that innovation is an iterative process, and so we will continue to get insights, learn, ideate, and prototype to keep our virtual learning experience the best that it can be. So in all this talk about design, who is really part of our design team? It's not just Mr. Erpelding, Risha, and me. It's a very inclusive process. Every parent, every learning experience designer, and every student gets to have a voice and it's included. It's the entire D39 community. We're also attempting to get insights from students that might not have the monetary resources, environment, or those who struggled with virtual learning from back in March to ensure that every student has a voice and is treated with equity, is empowered to succeed. So hopefully this tells you why our design team has come together. My co-designer, Risha, will walk you through how we're going to do it. Risha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So at Design 39, we are trained to be creative problem solvers who can design meaningful solutions. To expand, the basic premise of the design process is around empathy, understanding what other people want and need. Therefore, we start with empathizing to understand and researching through ambiguity. Next, we define our guiding principles and ideate cool solutions. Afterward, we model and prototype these ideas and test them for their effectiveness. Finally, we publish them to make an impact in our society. Empathizing to understand, we started with failure. It's best to understand what people need before solving any problems. Starting with failure will minimize it while testing our prototype later on. Researching through ambiguity. Next, information was collected from all potential users of our solution, like parents, LEDs, which are teachers, and of course, students. Defining the priority. After we researched, we condensed all of our research into 4 large groups: connections, equity, screen time, and superpower purpose. Each of these groups was in charge of creating a mission statement. We defined the priority. We categorized our research into 4 large groups: connections, equity, screen time, and superpower purpose. Each group created a mission statement. The equity team's mission statement was: students need a way to interact with virtual learning equitably so that learning experiences can be improved for all. Ideate cool solutions. After, we split into micro design teams with students from our school who wanted to participate in this initiative. Each group micro design team brainstormed ideas for one of the categories above. We brainstormed multiple ideas and organized them onto Padlets. We have also started to model and prototype our ideas. Next steps are key in the design process. So some of our next steps for prototyping are to merge all of our ideas into one actionable plan. For testing, we plan on implementing this initiative at the beginning of the school year. We will collect feedback and improve our design to make virtual learning the best it can be. Finally, we will publish our model for virtual learning so that it can make an impact in our society. Now that you've heard that, here's my personal experience. So I am on the equity team. Our finding was that students need a way to interact with virtual learning equitably so that learning experiences can be improved for all. Some ideas that we had in the work completion section was that students can have access to pacing guides, checklists, and/or task lists if they need extra help with time management. We have come up with similar ideas in the categories like technical support and connection between students and LEDs. Now I'll pass it back to Tanay for his personal experience.
Thank you, Risha. One of the best parts about Design 39 is the collaboration aspect of it. And one of my favorite memories is participating in the D39 Maker Fair, where we got to be a kidpreneur and come up with our business plan, make and sell our product in the real world, and make a profit, might I add. I wanted us students to have the same experience in the virtual and learning environment that I would have if there was no pandemic. And so, even though we're living and making history in these unprecedented times, we can become the architects of our learning and have the power to create our future. So let's make the best lemonade ever. Thank you. We will be happy to answer any possible questions that you might have.
Thanks so much, Tanay. Sorry we had those technical difficulties with Zoom bombers. I think from an equity standpoint, we want to make sure we reach each and every kid. And I think that's the critical component to all this, is that you see that kids get distracted. And so we want to make sure that at our space, kids have a voice and ultimately can make that learning awesome for them too. So apologize that happened to us all, and that's the reality that we're living in. So one thing that's fantastic is we also have a learning experience designer with us, Kyle Osmus. He's one of our 8th grade STEM humanities and works with all of us here. So Mr. Osmus, you want to just say hello?
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Joe. Yes, I'm a teacher at Design 39 campus. I've been at the school since it opened 8 years ago or so. So I was on the design team and to open the school. And when we did open, the very first thing that we used was the design process. So I think it's critical and obviously super important that we continue to use the design process, especially in situations like the one we're in with virtual learning and the pandemic going on. So really one of our main goals at our school is to promote student agency and bringing students to the table with all of design that we do, both inside and outside the classroom. So, and just so you guys all know, yes, I've been part of this group, but I've literally just been listening and help facilitate. This is all the students. So I'm just extremely proud to be part of our school and obviously of our kids that are sharing their really awesome ideas here.
What's also great is we all have Tejas on the call, and from an equity lens, students oftentimes are going from school to school and have new opportunities. And Tejas, you want to share real quickly on your interest in being with this team and what you found value in that space?
So hello, my name is Tejas, and I'm a new student going to Design 39. I wanted to join this group so I can help give the perspective of a new student, because in the past I have moved from school to school. So I think I can understand how many students feel when they move to a school. And like being included, I think that's a really important thing to have, especially in the um, virtual learning area, because we're not going to school, we're not talking to people. So I feel that's very important to have like be connected with your peers and teachers.
Well said. One of the things I just want to share with you real quickly, we have what's called the culture cards. They were referenced earlier. So these are like our culture cards that we have behind. We use it for hiring, for solving challenges. And the real critical piece is that just empathizing to understand and really looking at that through a lens of equity. Because as we know right now, there's a lot of ambiguity that we're trying to navigate through. And that idea of understanding the needs, and inside of that space we can find insights, and those insights are what's really creative for us to be able to create some new solutions, because ultimately what we want to do is ideate cool solutions. And like the new way forward, we can't just keep those ideas to ourselves. We want to make sure that we're sharing those across the team. One of the things we also did is we brought in our families. So let me put this back up again, is we dug into our like making virtual learning awesome. We had different sessions from TK3, 4, 5, and 6, 8, and we had different questions that we had up to get our conversations going with our families. We had over 500 families in this design process virtually over the course of 2 weeks. So questions like, keep doing this, it's really helped from last year, March 13th on to the end of June, to what are those social emotional supports, what else is just on your mind? And then parents can kind of vote up those things. Then we took that data, and then Kyle and his team, the 6-8 team, said, what are the other questions that are really interesting within that space that we need to dig into more? Like, how do we balance the need for those who want more structure and those who want more flexibility? How do we balance online learning with offline learning, purposeful Zoom sessions? And so that was really critical. So we're not just getting the data from our teachers and admin, but from our students and also from our parents. So kind of creating this condition of really empathizing to understand, so that they can create not the schedule, and you see that across the nation, all these beautiful schedules that are being created, but really starting with learning and how to make those connections so that at the end of the day, learning is awesome for our kids. So we want to just kind of open it up. That's a high level. We will also have these slide decks available, I would imagine, right, Tanae and Risha, available for us on the new way forward, and to be able to make sure that we can share these resources across our networks. So if there's any questions specifically around our process or what it looks like here at Design 39 Campus, we're a TK8 public school in the Poway Unified District. And so we're one of the 39 schools in the district. We're not a charter school, we're a public school. We do have a memorandum of understanding to really work differently with our teachers union, but really it's around creating the future. And the future is created because people like students, teachers, and parents want to make that happen. All right, so if there's any questions specifically from our group here today, we'd love to hear from you and have the students share out. And Risha and Tanae, while we're waiting, you guys have broken into some particular working groups as well, the design team that's working this week, and then you're gonna be pitching ideas on Friday to the teachers. You wanna talk a little bit about that process, why people are thinking about their questions?
Sure. So we split into micro design teams, and so like I said, I was in the equity team. So on Friday, we're going to pitch to the teachers our ideas for solving some issues with equity and some ideas on prototyping that we have, like making it an actionable plan. We'll also pitch to the teachers. Other groups will pitch, like screen time and connections and superpower purpose. And Tanae, I think you're in superpower purpose, right?
Yes. So to add on to Risha, each micro design team will be responsible for leading an initiative to solve one or more possible failures about their micro design team. Micro design team idea would be how can we look through the lens of equity, which is Risha's team? So how can we look through the lens of equity to make sure that every student has the correct monetary resources and gets their voice heard, even the students that struggled from in virtual learning from back in March? And there's more micro design teams that I can go into detail if you want.
Super helpful. And I want to show this idea of like starting with failure, which is quite fascinating. So here's, this came from the students in 6-8. So they wanted to put up on the wall here, if virtual learning really tanks, like what are those things that we want to solve from the beginning? And so versus waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks in, a month in, that something fails. So if we can like maybe describe that and identify that early on, like feeling disconnected. So those are really critical components for us for starting with failure to ultimately dig into empathy in that space. All right, any questions? I see one here about the culture card, so I can talk a little bit about that. But Mr. Osmus, anything to add around having the students pitch to you and your team on Friday?
Yeah, so just this is kind of something rare. You don't really, I don't know what school you see this at, if any, across the country, but our teachers at our school, we haven't actually like set a schedule, or we haven't kind of put anything in stone yet. So bringing kids to the table is really, really meaningful to the teachers, because obviously they are our customers, and with empathy in mind, we want to make sure that learning experiences are meeting their needs. So parents, their desires and wants are important, but obviously the kids in our classrooms are the ones that are getting directly impacted by that. So having that student voice and just empowering students to know that their voices matter and to make a difference is, I mean, if they can leave, you know, our 8th grade going on to high school with just that one skill, then we know we've made a difference. So.
Yeah, super unique. So in terms of the culture cards, we use those for staffing when we just did hiring this past week. So we have a design process for hiring. It's a 4-stage process. First is an ETAL. Yeah, Google it, you can't find it. So that's the purpose. The second is the design challenge where we put all the candidates together. Third is performance task, and then an interesting interview. But prior to doing that, we use our culture cards to call out those conditions that we're really looking for, either from the cognitive diversity that we're not seeing yet in our system, conditions like prototyping greatness, someone who really has a superpower in that space, someone who really brings energy. So we use our culture cards to define the sandbox in terms of what we're looking for a candidate. We also use them to solve challenges in terms of personnel. So we really used this a lot last year with K3 as we were experimenting with these cards. So as we have 22 teachers on our kindergarten through 3rd grade teams. And so you can imagine a lot of energy and passion. And so how do we address each other effectively and not blame and shame someone? So we use the culture cards like, you're a person who empathizes to understand. And what I would like to know more about this challenge we're seeking is, and so it helps to frame the challenge as well. So that's how we use the culture cards. So they're kind of as the embodiment of, if our culture stinks, then everything else that we try to bring forward is not going to work. So, Tanae and Risha, do you see anything in the chat box there that we could address? I saw something there about a favorite virtual learning piece. You guys want to talk about that one?
Sure. So one of my favorite virtual learning experience was my favorite thing about virtual is the fact that there's no rush in the morning. You don't have to wake up early, and you don't have to like wake up early, set an alarm, get scared to death by your alarm, and yeah, there's no morning rush, which is probably one of my favorite virtual learning experience.
Risha.
Yeah, so I like the flexibility about virtual learning. Like sure, we have some Zoom meetings that the teacher assigns, but otherwise we're able to do our work when we find time, and we're able to be flexible with our schedule. We can do more things than were able to do in person school.
I think that was the critical piece for us as we were looking through doing this design work, was everybody was around us was starting with schedules and putting kids in that bell-to-bell framework, doing probably the worst parts of school. And so the idea here is, what are the best bits of school and how do we frame around that? And so as the students dug into the data, I saw that as one of the questions. What did the data start to reveal? Was there these things that were really critical around screen time, flexibility, and structure? There was another theme around connections. That's connections with new students, connections with the curriculum, connections with the social emotional well-being. So all those kind of things was around connections. And this idea around superpowers, it was another kind of interesting thing. So today you want to talk a little bit about superpowers, because how do you do electives? We call them workshops and deep dives, but the idea of electives, how do you bring those into the forefront and allow students to have space in that? So today, I know that's one of your groups. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So the purpose of the Superpower Purpose team is dedicated to trying to implement all the awesome activities we used to do in-person school, such as our clubs or maker fair and workshops and electives, like Mr. Yu was saying. And that's the main sole purpose of the Superpower Purpose.
You also had an idea around connecting, like, because all you guys have your own superpowers as well. And doing something, because our tagline is basically elevating humanity. So how do we get these life-ready thought partners who elevate humanity, who make a difference, not just because of a GPA, but it's about making a difference? So what was one of the ideas that you guys been bantering around today?
So one of the ideas that we had come up with was instead of having a maker fair where we'd sell products, instead we would have a service fair called Experts Expo, where we would sell services, such as if someone had a superpower for building a website, they would sell a service that they would make a website for someone who needed it. Or someone tutoring on, if someone had a superpower for math, they could tutor a younger student and help become like buddies or older buddies and stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a critical component. I know, Mr. Osmus, you have that kind of in-person learning where you really leverage our TK8 campus. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and kind of some thinking, because another big piece to the data Kyle could also talk about is this idea around collaboration. It's like, of course, collaboration, but how do you make that happen in a virtual space? So maybe, Mr. Osmus, a little bit of conversation around that and some of the things you've experimented with and some insights.
Yeah, so obviously it's far easier for students and their peers and teachers to collaborate in person. So one of the challenges that we're facing is, how do we get kids engaged in this collaborative experience virtually? So, I mean, as a middle school set of teachers, we've declared that, that's going to be one of our primary goals, is how do we allow kids to navigate the virtual world? But as we all know, learning happens better together. So giving kids opportunities to collaborate. So specifically, just if I could give an example, over past years, I've one of the benefits of being at a TK through 8 school is, our bigger kids, our 8th graders, can leverage their superpowers to help assist some of our younger kids. So I usually start the year with an empathy project, and it's around this idea of like the history of Earth and how things have evolved over time. And so we've consistently, every year, we collaborate with 3rd graders, as that's also one of their science, next generation science standards. So we go through the design process by our 8th graders, getting in groups, and then they have a set of 3rd grade buddies that they empathize with. They interview and they collect basically a bunch of data about what types of books they like to read. And then our 8th graders are challenged with the task of creating books about the history of our Earth. And even more challenging is they have to try to make that content accessible to 3rd graders. It's actually probably one of my most memorable experiences throughout the year, because just seeing them be able to sit together and read together, and the 3rd graders laughing, and it's just an amazing learning experience. And it takes a lot of time. We're talking, on and off for about a month, visiting our customers and empathizing with them. So one of my main things that I've been working on over the last couple of days is actually, how do I recreate that virtually for kids? Thinking about some of our constraints, and but although you can't replace in-person learning, I think you can mimic it in a pretty powerful way. So yeah, really the goal is how can we connect kindergarten through 8th grade, and how can we give those kids this opportunity to collaborate, as that's one of our guiding principles. So
Risha, if you could just kind of prep, there's a couple slides in here. Maybe you could prep how you guys organize and coordinate, because you have the whole kind of project map in terms of your timeline, in terms of our agendas. And then maybe pull up the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious Padlet wall so we can see how we got those design constraints from the failing forward. So maybe have a couple of those slides ready to go, and then we can work through that on one of the questions. One of the questions was, are there any skills that you all learned in virtual learning that was improved because of virtual learning? Tanae, maybe you, while Risha's getting those slides ready.
Sure. One of the biggest one of the skills that has improved the most is definitely my student agency, which is student agency is the fact that students can own their learning, can help have a voice in what their learning experiences should look like, and just like we're doing right now. So definitely student agency has improved for me.
Tanae, can you talk a little bit about, I thought it was really curious how you talked about being vulnerable with going through puberty. And I know you were kind of in your head. You want to talk a little bit about that story? And we chatted that through, and you put that right in your deck. I thought that was pretty awesome.
Sure. So a few days ago, I was a little conscious of my voice since it is changing and it become deeper. And so I became a little conscious of it. And so I talked with Mr. E, and Mr. E gave me the great idea of embracing my difference, and the fact that I have a deeper voice. And so I said, I shall embrace it, and I put it in my slide deck.
Embrace who you are. Love it. All right, Risha, do you have kind of maybe just give us a scale of how you guys are all working together as students without a lot of adult supervision and actually doing the right work? We saw some examples from kids doing the wrong work. Now, what can it look like when you're doing the right work? So let's take a look.
Yeah, so we started off with failure. Like,
are you able to you want to take over the screen? Is that cool?
Yeah.
All right, there you go.
So yeah, so we started off with just like possible failures with remote learning. And we also sent a form and a video out to all the middle school students, asking them if they would like to join us in creating a model for virtual learning. We also, so the next day we did research based on the student Padlet that Principal Lee has shown and the parent Padlet. We noticed some of the more, what's it called?
Yeah, voted up, popular or interest, right?
Yeah, more popular interests. We noticed those ones and took them into consideration when designing our needs and the insights. So some needs that we have noticed were people need to be flexible. Students need to keep their interest in learning. Collaboration would be a challenge because we could not work together hands-on, but we were wondering if there are other ways to duplicate collaboration in a virtual setting. We also started brainstorming some problems and moving them into their categories. For example, screen time, we were wondering how we would physically be connecting, so how we would learn off of the screen. In equity, we were wondering how everybody was going to have internet access if they didn't have internet access at home, because internet is a big part of virtual learning. And I know Tejas was in the connections group. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so the connections group is basically us thinking of ways to get students to work together for like school projects or just to like feel at ease at school. So some things that like need to happen are like new students need to be connected with each other so they don't feel like left out of the whole school's groups. Stress is a big thing because like humans are social animals, so we need to talk to people, do things with each other. And student mixers and clubs are very important, but those are hard to do in a virtual environment because you're not with the people in your clubs. And in under connections ideation, my group and I yesterday we were going through different ways we could solve those problems. So new students, the second one you can see, we thought of like mentoring students on the ins and outs of Design 39. And buddies, so a buddy system, so like you're with someone and learn more about the school, where everything is. And teacher facilitation. I think that personally, I think that's really important because the teacher has like, the teacher can connect students with each other. Because at my old school, there were these cliques. So, and teachers really helped with like saying you can go and talk with them if you have any questions, how to collaborate and connect. So you really have to understand digital tools to stay connected to peers. So these are some like really important ideas that we have to take into consideration.
Fantastic. So Risha, if you want to stop screen sharing there. So if you think about that for a second. So today is Monday. So that was yesterday. Tejas, you were meeting yesterday with a group of how many students?
It was out of 7 people, 3 others came, so 4 of us.
4 of you were meeting on a Sunday to talk about learning in preparation for Friday. So that's the whole thing, is that learning happens all the time. So we put kids in these structured boxes that you're going to learn from 9 to 3. The actual school time, like actually like interactive school time where you're getting direction from a teacher, is probably maybe 2 hours. But learning happens all day long and all week long. And so I think that's really fascinating to see. Second thing you might have noticed is that here he is. He's a brand new student. We haven't even started school. School starts September 2nd for us. So he's already making connections and he's already has a voice at the table. I mean, how fantastic is that, right? So how long does it take kids to get a voice on campus? And here it is happening right away because you create the space for kids to have that opportunity to connect. Super cool. All right, any questions from our Zoom group here that you want to just say in person? We'd love to see that and have that interaction with the kids. If not, we're coming to a close.
I have a question. This is Carolyn. So for each of you, is there something new that you've learned, that you started to do like as a hobby because you were home? We've been hearing a lot of kids doing passion projects because they were so scheduled at school, to your point about, you know, having all these things that you have to do each day. And then you might have sports after school or clubs and not finding the time to even think about pursuing something really, just something you have in the back of your head that you're like, oh, I'd love to do that, but I just don't have time. Have any of you started something that new that you just thought you wouldn't have time for?
So one thing that I started doing, I've always wanted to learn Japanese. I don't know why. It's just been like you said, in the back of my head. So I started like learning basic like Japanese phrases and how to write because I had more time, because before my schedule was completely full with swimming, playing basketball, and going to school. So I never got time to do it, but now I can.
There are a few things that I've started doing now in quarantine. I like to play football in my spare time, but now due to the quarantine, I can't. So I've started playing golf. It's a very it's relaxing, but it's definitely very challenging, very physically challenging. So I like playing golf. And one thing that I've always wanted to do is I've always been loving technology and AI. And so I've started coding an app called Ad Karma, which would take leftover food from like restaurants or people who have leftover food and be able to donate it to homeless shelters. So I thought I never had time for that, but now due to quarantine, I'm able to achieve that.
Yeah, so, and for me, I never thought I'd have time to build stuff, but now I have time and I really like building clay sculptures and pots and stuff like that.
I love it.
Great question. Thanks, Carolyn. Mr. Osmus, you have time for things like your kids. I know you get nothing more than a bajillion points to spend time with family.
Yeah,
we laugh. So there's some inside joke around bajillion points. Yes, there's assessments and grades, but it's kids will work for a bajillion points. They don't need a grade. So there's some fun stuff. If you ever want to talk about like how we do grading, it's quite fascinating. Mr. Osmus.
Yeah, I think that was one of my biggest takeaway from virtual learning. And this whole pandemic is we kind of go into this mindset of like everything is terrible. And so I could try to reframe that and just looked at this opportunity at this, this time as just like creating this new opportunity to connect with my family. And I've actually noticed since we've been off since March, like everything seemed to slow down a little bit. And it's allowed me to kind of really make sure I was enjoying the moments that I were in. And I get a lot of time to spend with my kids, and I see them in academic settings, which has been a really plus and bonus for me. So being both a dad and as a teacher, I think has actually been rewarding during this time. But yeah, so it's just, finding opportunities in time of crisis, I think is super critical right now.
Victoria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this. It's been an incredible discussion to witness. This is Victoria, and just building off of what you just shared, Kyle, as well as the students, kind of finding new avenues and new activities and things to do with the time. I was just curious and would love to hear from the students particularly. I think we've seen school take very different forms now. What is your most radical dream for K-12 education in this country? If you could say anything, what would be your most radical dream? Thank you.
Real interesting, real quick. Tanae and I were having a conversation, I think it was probably February, right, Tanae? Before coronavirus was even kind of being a thing. And I said, Tanae, I want you to think about if school didn't exist, what would happen? And it was just kind of fascinating because like a month later, like school got turned off. And so if school didn't exist, so I'm sure it gave you some time to think your wildest dreams, Tanae, and the rest of you.
That's a great question. One of my most radical dreams for school would be that if school never was invented, like what would happen, as Mr. E was saying, like basically what would happen if school didn't exist, and that's basically what's happening here. And so how would students learn, and how would people learn, and how do we evolve as humans, and how we learn to live, how we can build such amazing structures. And so it's definitely one of my most radical dreams.
Thanks,
Risha,
I appreciate it.
Go ahead. Risha, I know you have some radical dreams, right?
Yeah, so one of my dreams was that school would be completely about hands-on stuff, and there's like no writing and no solving stuff in workbooks. I think Design 39 goes pretty close to that, but that's my radical dream.
So filling out worksheets, that wouldn't be your, yeah, that's an important critical component, right? So how do you make learning authentic, real world and purposeful? Mr. Osmus, any to add to on that one? And I think we're coming to the end.
I think the kids said it all. They're just, making learning as meaningful as possible, even during this virtual time and just, making the best of what we have.
Yeah. So just maybe, Tejas, do you want to close out? Because you were so eloquent in talking from that perspective of, it just, punches me in the gut when you hear about students not connecting during virtual learning from March to June. And here our kids are thinking about, how do we ensure that each and every learner has access, each and every learner is heard, each and every learner has a space. So Tejas, maybe close out on that spot, and then some final thoughts.
Yeah, so like especially, so what Mr. E was saying about like the kids being left out, like I said before, that's a really big thing to me, because school is a place where people should learn together, not just by themselves. And like what that also is one of my dreams about school. Many schools, they just do like you get a worksheet and you fill it out, but I've always found it more interesting to do like work in a group. So like one of my biggest dreams would be to like only have school and only do like work in groups instead of just having a piece of paper. So I think that also doing more work in groups can also help build connections with each other.
Well said. So you can see it would be really easy to turn off this Zoom call. You see Zoom bombers come in and pivot away from that, but that's the reality we live in, right? We have to navigate complexity and the ambiguity and hurt and hate, and we address it head on, right? Because wearing shirts like this, it doesn't matter if you just wear the shirt, you have to take action. And that's what we are about. We're biased towards action and biased towards doing the right work. And if you have a student that's disconnected on your campus, as we saw that came onto this session, that's all the more important reason to make sure we're connecting with each and every learner so that they're not making those kind of decisions that are hurtful and hateful. Also, if you want to learn more about learner-centered, this idea about putting learning at the center and not school at the center, please visit Education Reimagined. There's a great document there about a learner-centered movement, so please check out Education Reimagined. Also, our thought partners with Getting Smart, and so many others. So if you take a look at the New Way Forward, we'll be having more of these sessions together. This was the kickoff one, so lots learned, but most importantly, lots being learned by our students. And so thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to more conversations with you and having a new way forward. Bye, guys.